be bigger.
All right, we're live.
All right.
What will?
Andrew, do you have hard copies of the agenda?
We just lost Jane.
Oops. We've just lost Jane. We're gonna get her back. How you feeling, Andy?
Feeling better, but not 100%. But now my wife just tested positive and she's now down.
Felt really sick all last week, all weekend, but I never was positive. I must have something else.
Hope so.
Senator Starr, if I sit in your chair, can I vote for you?
Ah.
Okay, I'm sorry. I pushed, instead of got it, I pushed leave meeting. So I got thrown out. So I
That's when you
apologize.
get thrown out of your own meeting.
I think so.
I know.
Stay tuned.
Oh, I'll come right in.
You sure?
Okay, take my picture off.
Senator Cummings will go look for you.
I'll right there.
All right, so I think we're still live, so I apologize for that interruption. That's what happens when you just inadvertently push the wrong command. So this is Senate Appropriations, and we're continuing our work on S5. And we took testimony Friday. The role of this committee is to really look at the appropriations. I realize that we're getting a lot of email from people about what the bill does or what it doesn't do. I think that it is important that we just make it clear that what we're going to do today is look at a couple of areas around additional spending. There was the testimony that we had from Commissioner Tierney indicated that funding was not included for what is really an important first step, and that's the potential study. And the importance of the potential study is really to help inform all the work that goes forward. And I think it's really important for anyone listening that what this bill would do is not to implement anything immediately. It is to set us forth on a path. So what we have had drafted for us is a bill that would reflect the requested money. There was additional testimony that we received from the Office of Racial Equity around costs. And so I asked Joint Fiscal to confirm what would be the total amount of money that would be needed, what was included and what was not. In the comments made by the Office of Racial Equity, there was concern that the per diems might not be sufficient. However, for those of us who were around last year, we know that in fact we passed a bill that allows per diems to be more than the standard $50 a day with justification. So it is possible to have flexibility regarding the reimbursement to get participation from identified populations. So with that, Stephanie, do you want to run through the money in terms of what we're dealing with? Senator Starr, you were correct. It did add up to 900,000. Part was how you treated the 400 versus 450 that Commissioner Tierney was referencing. So I think it would be helpful if we could get clear what we're proposing to include. And I hope that it is reflective of making sure that the funding that has been identified by the administration as necessary to support this work, we are providing as part of this amendment. So Stephanie, if you would be willing to go through the money.
Sure, I can speak to that. There is a fiscal note that Joyce Manchester has put together on the bill that has charts for both the Public Utility Commission and the Public Service Department. But starting with the Public Utility Commission, which has, as it's come to the committee, $800,000 in an appropriation to cover their work. That is where the per diems would be paid out of from the Public Utility Commission's appropriated funds. And in Joyce's work on that, there is sufficient funds to pay per diems that are above the $50 per day. What is not included and what we would recommend including is another $25,000 for translation services. That was not included in the $800,000 for the Public Utility Commission. So that would be the change there.
Okay.
And in the Public Service Department, which we heard from Commissioner Tierney last Thursday, the change there would be bringing that number up from 400,000 to 900,000. And that includes the cost of the staff. And the staff that she was requesting was actually 3 folks, 2 analysts and 1 attorney. What is written into the bill right now is 1 attorney and 1 analyst in her department. And so the cost of that, those 3 positions is $450,000. And then $250,000 for the potential study, and then the other $200,000 for consultant services. That's what would bring it to the $900,000. That would, we would not be making an appropriation to the Office of Racial Equity, though. That would all flow through the PUC.
Okay. So thank you for confirming. So the one thing that we had identified then after consultation with the office is to confirm that we did need to add the money for the translation services that they had identified in their comments to us. Okay.
Yes.
All right. One of the points that I would like to make is for those of us who haven't been in this arena, but that is the importance of the potential study. And that was reinforced by Secretary Moore in terms of the importance of that work, because that really informs everything else. And it really evaluates the technical, economic, and achievable potential of the plan. And it is, I think, going to be very helpful to address the very questions or concerns that moving forward with such a standard would provide. And so it includes an analysis of the rate, the bill impact, setting attainable targets, and supporting a program designed to achieve long-term potential. So I think that based on the understanding of what role that study takes as the very first step in this process, I think that from my perspective, I feel that that is one area of that needs to be added to the bill, because that is it's such an important part of the future work to inform. Questions about the money as it relates to moving this forward. Senator Starr.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, is there a timeline on the study work so that it doesn't drag on for years or?
Yes, I think Secretary Moore told us that it usually is about 6 months. And so that would be really the work that would help inform any rulemaking or program design. I think that there's been really concern about, the timelines, what's attainable, making sure that that what is feasible is clearly understood. And so that is, it's something that could be provided within a reasonable time frame based on my recollection of what Secretary Moore indicated.
Thanks.
Any other questions? Senator Sears, you're muted though.
I'm sorry, I'm a little confused, and maybe it's because I missed Friday's meeting, but I don't understand, if we're studying something, why we're already putting the mechanism in place to change the standards and requiring the fuel credits and all the other things that are in S5 as it came to our committee. So I thought you would study it, then determine whether it's practical or not. And I just want to make sure we're studying it to determine how we're going to make it work, or are we studying it to decide whether it's practical? I mean, I was here when the Shumlin administration scrapped the single payer, and I know that was hard on a lot of people, but they did the study and they decided they just couldn't afford to do it. Is there that opportunity here?
Yes, because the other part of the amendment that I'm going to be proposing, and I think it's reflective of the committee's concern, and I've heard that everyone anticipated we would do that, and that's the same language that we had last year, along the same lines that we would have a check back. So once, excuse me, once that potential study is done, then that would lead to the work of the PUC would build on that, and then there would be a requirement. And Ellen Tchaikovsky, I'll get it right, will be here at 2, but it really is saying that before we move forward and do approve final rules, we have that, last year was called a check back. So it does provide that very opportunity, Senator Sears, because of the many concerns and questions that need to be answered so that we fully understand the impact in all aspects of what is being proposed here.
Thank you.
I'm really sorry. If anyone's listening, I hope you realize that I am home.
Yeah.
I'm homesick, and so I'm doing my best, but I apologize for my voice and my interruption and maybe my lack of clarity on things. But what the amendment would do would provide the necessary funding in the areas that I talked about. It would also, in the course of looking at the communications from our Office of Racial Equity, there are a number of more technical kinds of changes or amendments that were added, including some protection around confidential information, income or tax information. And that's what would also be reflected is the recommendations from that office. Obviously, that's been a topic of concern or statement, and that is how we hear directly from Vermonters that are going to be impacted by any such move toward our efforts to reduce our thermal carbon emissions footprint. So as this morning, the Senate Natural Resources Committee reviewed the, the recommendations from the Office of Racial Equity. Due to the timing, it came in a little toward the end. And so with agreement, I said, because they were really more clarification rather than major policy changes or whatever, to just include them in one package of amendments that would come from this committee if we vote to amend the bill with the check back provision that nothing would move forward without affirmative action by the future legislature. It would fund the various activities that we talked about based on the recommendations and the testimony from key members of the administration. And I think from a historical perspective, this, and I think Senator Perchlik can speak to this, but what is being proposed here is really something that was initially put forward in the Comprehensive Energy Plan of 2022. And so there's no question that it's raised a lot of questions, a lot of concern, and that's why we want to be very judicious in how we want to proceed with this so that we have the opportunity with the benefit of this study to fully understand and then modify or, however we want to proceed based on the plan. But as it's been indicated to me, any plan should be able to withstand that legislative scrutiny and testimony and be modified or whatever action a future in a future session, the legislature may want to take. Senator Bray, perhaps you want to just identify the small changes that you're recommending that we add.
Thank you, Senator Kitchell. So the small changes that came out of testimony, two testimonies in Natural Resources, and had started an amendment to the bill that we were anticipating bringing before third reading. But then late Friday, received a memo from the Equity Office that was more complete. We went through that this morning in Senate Natural and asked Ms. Chakowski to revise our amendment, and I'm reviewing the language that you have in front of you in the report of the Appropriations Committee, and it has been updated to include exactly the proposed amendments from Senate Natural this morning. So it is the two committees are in sync on that.
Okay.
And as you pointed out, they are really pretty modest changes. The fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh instances, just to highlight that we want to have translation services in order to improve the ability of the PUC to engage a more diverse audience. There were concerns around confidentiality, so in places where around customer income data, so we made it more explicit and in two different locations in the bill, just to ensure that that information is required under law to be kept confidential. And that is and then the sixth instance of amendment refers to a level of penalty. It was a penalty that was triple the base rate, and now it is, as suggested by the Equity Office, a rate of 4 times the traditional rate. And that is it for suggestions. If I can very briefly just say, I really appreciate what Appropriations has done with the so-called check back vote at the end. I've been out and about talking to a lot of people, and I'm sensing that even amongst those who are concerned.
Whoops. I think,
There we go. Even amongst those who are concerned, that people have said, including fuel dealers, they said, we know that this system is going to change over time. What we're concerned about is that we're moving ahead without, with an expectation that the bill as drafted will be implemented if no action is taken. And I call it a very reasonable thing to say, let's have a full stop and evaluation, and we don't proceed unless we review the plans, if that's what you want to call the rule from the PUC, and then implement them with or without changes. But I think it will buy a lot of people comfort, and it makes good common sense to me. And I feel like we have been hearing a lot, and we're listening and responding. So I thank Appropriations for bringing change forward.
the one other thing that we did talk about last week and has been reflected, and that is with the Inflation Reduction Act, there is federal funds available. And so I had asked Ellen to include a provision that, excuse me, that to the extent possible, we maximize the available federal funds to deliver heat measures. So we felt that it was really important that we take advantage of those revenues in anything that we're designing. And the other, and we do have a copy of the amendment, but I thought if you wanted, we could wait until Ellen was here to run through it, or we could run through it now. It's just really reflective of what we've talked about. The one thing that is very important to me, and that gets into that rulemaking authority and the check back language. Over the last year, there have been numerous incidents where it's very difficult for LCAR to really evaluate rules against what is legislative intent. And we have had different people issue their version of what they thought was intended. And in the absence of really clarity or clear framework and language to work within, we find ourselves very much sometimes revising, or people will be advancing what they thought was from their perspective. So it's very important, as far as I'm concerned, that any rules that wend their way to LCAR can more easily be evaluated against what was the legislative intent. Because in the absence of that clarity, you end up with a great deal of difference of opinion and debate. And so that's my own personal view, shared on a couple of instances that we've experienced within just the last 12 months. And I don't think it's a good thing to expect LCAR to be able to parse out or fill in the gaps, or be the focal point of further debate or disagreement. So to me, this is helpful in avoiding that or minimizing that potential. Any other comments or questions people might have?
Yeah.
Do you want me to?
Madam Chair, you do have one from Senator Bray.
Okay, could I just take a break? I've got to go get some water. This medication is just killing me, and I'll be right back.
Sure.
All right, I'm back. So Senator Bray?
Yeah, so thanks. I'm sorry you're feeling so poorly. I appreciate that you're jumping in anyway. As someone who's served on LCAR for a while, along with Senator McDonald, we're both on the committee that did S5. We added an intent section, and then actually learned, maybe to our surprise, that under current statute, we're actually required to do this. So there's an intent section. All that said, it's a long way from reading, 7 lines of intent language in the bill to having LCAR interpret a long rule from the PUC 2 years hence. So,
Okay, was that just a comment?
yeah, we're trying to address it, but even so, LCAR is not in a great position to evaluate intent.
Senator Perchlik, did you have any? No.
No,
Do you-
I'm okay.
So it's unfortunately, Ellen should be finished in another committee at 2. And I thought before we did anything, we should do due diligence and just go through the amendment so that people have a chance to see all the different provisions. We've really reviewed them all, and I hope I've been able to capture, the requested funding and address last week's discussion and go back and put in the language around what would be the legislative role as we move forward. So I can either just have us take a break and go offline until Ellen comes back, if people would prefer to do that. It's so difficult not being in the room.
Well, will she come along at what time, Jane?
She indicated that she was in a House committee until 2 and that she would be down as soon as she was finished there.
So 15 minutes?
We could do that. Why don't we just go off live for 15 minutes until we have our drafter of the amendment that I've reviewed with you, and so everybody can have a chance to see it in total.